Hello, everybody. Welcome into another segment of Fantasy Fest 2023. I am Ryan Wormeli. We are halfway through the fest here, so I hope you're sticking around all day long. But as we get into the back half of the fest, trying to give you all the best advice you need to dominate your drafts, probably this weekend if you wait to the last minute like many of my home leagues do. We don't have time for a preamble today. We are on a strict 30 minutes, no fun conversation, debates about all these crazy things, even though I'm talking with two of my favorite people in the industry, Pat Fitzmaurice and Billy Muzio. Guys, just last week, we did a show together. The band is back together again. And you guys, as we talked about last week, are two of the bar none most accurate experts in the industry. So I feel quite honored that I get to talk with you again so quickly. Like I said, though, no preamble. We will jump right in. We were talking today about running back tiers and rankings. We're just going to go through tier by tier and see which guys do we like, which do we not like. Is this a tier we want to be drafting from in general? And we are going to start right at the very top with tier number one. It's the obvious, guys. It's Christian McCaffrey. It's Austin Eckler. It's Bijan Robinson, the rookie, and it's Nick Chubb. So, Billy, I will start with you. Does anybody here not belong, or is this kind of the correct tier one?
I think it's the correct tier one. I think that Chubb's kind of on the fringe here. I would put him just outside of this tier, quite frankly. I might even have Bijan just outside of this tier. Those two kind of in a tier of their own, quite in my opinion. And I would say a name that we don't have in there that I would like to see in there that Pat would disagree with is Saquon Barkley.
Yes, if anybody listened to the show just last week, you heard how much these two disagree on Saquon Barkley. Pat, when you're looking at this tier, is there anybody besides Saquon, obviously because you wouldn't agree with that you would put in, or would this be the four you would stick with?
That's the four I would stick with, Ryan. And I agree with Billy. Like, I think Chubb is just sort of barely holding on. For me, these are all first round values. And Chubb is like, a guy I would take maybe at 112, depending on the league format. We can argue about Barkley, I guess, when we get to the second tier. But I do agree with the first tier as you read it.
Is the order correct here? Is CMC, he should be one, and Eckler should be two? And I know you see those two guys as kind of a step down, Billy.
Yeah, I of course other than Barkley, but yeah, inside this tier, I think the correct order outside of that is CMC and then Eckler. Of course, news with possible JT maybe wanting to land in Chargers would completely flip this tier upside down. But until that happens, we have to leave the tier order as is.
So, Fitz, if CMC, we all agree, is RB1, and this isn't half PPR, by the way, for the record. We're not looking at full or standard. This is just for half PPR tiers. But, Fitz, is CMC a guy that you would even consider ahead of Jefferson and Chase, or are those two so locked in that there's no running back you're considering until pick number 3 in drafts?
There's no running back I'm considering until pick number 3. But, and by the way, I do have Bijan ahead of Eckler. Like, Eckler's just not getting 120 some targets again. That's not happening. That was the Joe Lombardi offense. This is going to be the Kellen Moore offense. It's going to be different, more vertical. So we're not going to see a repeat of that, and we're probably not going to see a repeat of Eckler's touchdown total either.
So aside from those two obvious stud receivers, are these guys all going next? I mean, we'll throw, say, besides Kelsey as well. But besides Jefferson, Chase, and Kelsey, is it these four running backs, or are there other receivers that you would take ahead of any of these tier one running backs, Billy?
There's other receivers that I like ahead of a few of these names, quite frankly. I would consider Tyreek Hill. I would consider Cooper Kupp. I'd even consider, honestly, Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of a couple of these guys, depending upon the format. But if we're purely talking half PPR, I think that you could push Amon-Ra St. Brown outside of these running backs and lean this way. But I do think that Kupp and Tyreek should be very much in consideration ahead of all these running backs.
Same question, Fitz. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Billy on that. I might even throw CeeDee Lamb into that mix too. There are quite a few wide receivers I would take in front of Chubb, and I would definitely take Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp ahead of Eckler.
Let's move to tier 2, because tier 1's kind of easy. We all like these guys right there in tier 1 for a reason. Tier number 2 does start off with Saquon Barkley, then Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and Jonathan Taylor. This is 5 through 9 in the RB rankings. Again, Saquon, Pollard, Henry, Jacobs, and Taylor. And here's where we will dive in on Saquon. Again, please go back and listen to last week's show if you didn't hear it, about players to avoid. Saquon was one of the picks from Fitz. Meanwhile, he's RB1 for Billy. So, Fitz, I'll start with you here. Why is Saquon correctly not in tier 1?
He has not been special as a pass catcher since 2019. It's been a long time since we've seen that. Yes, a couple of those years were washes or near washes due to injury, but last year and the year before, just not efficient at all as a pass catcher. He scored 2 touchdowns receiving over his last 34 games, including playoffs. So the efficiency as far as yards per catch, yards per target are very mediocre. And, we thought he was going to be a Marshall Faulk type talent when he came into the league, a guy who provides two-way value as a runner and a pass catcher. Haven't really seen the pass catching. And, oh, by the way, he averaged 103 yards rushing through his first 9 regular season games last year. Over the last 7, I think it was 54.4 rushing yards per game. So he kind of tapered off. And I think the people who were investors in Saquon last year noticed the big slide in the second half of the season.
So, Billy, not only do you have Saquon in tier 1, you have him at the top of tier 1. Make the case for why he should be going ahead of all of these other guys.
Yeah, for me, it breaks down to opportunity share. So last year we saw him at 80.1%, which was RB3. We know that Christian McCaffrey is going to be heavily involved. However, we do want to see him healthy throughout the year. So I could see them easing him into games and not utilizing the same fashion. So expect to see some Elijah Mitchell, expect to see some Deebo Samuel behind the line of scrimmage as well. And in total snaps last year, we saw Barkley as the RB2 at 79.9%. Targets, although they have not been what they were in his rookie season where he eclipsed the 100 mark, he only had 76 last year, was still RB6 in total targets. But I do think that this offense is going to be funneled through him, going to be funneled through Waller, because there's just so many receivers that aren't even worth mentioning inside of this offense. And I think that we can clearly say that these two are going to be the funnel of the offense. So I like, again, his opportunity share in 2023. I could see it even being higher than 80.1%, maybe 83, 85%. Which would put him near the top of the list. And anytime we have that type of opportunity, we have to look that way for fantasy points because opportunity reigns supreme in fantasy sports.
So, Billy, is Saquon the only guy in this tier that you are looking at in round 1, or are you also considering Pollard, Henry, Jacobs, or Taylor in round 1?
So I think it depends upon the roster and the construction that you're building, right? If we're looking for a stack, I think that you can consider Pollard in there. You could, if you took Lamb, you could take Pollard in round 2. But if you wanted to take an RB that has upside of tier 1, I think Pollard is very much in a consideration inside of this tier as well. Just because we know that they're down Ezekiel Elliott, they have 200 rushing opportunities that are going to be on the board and for the taking. We do expect some of the other RBs in the mix to get some of these touches, but Pollard should see a pretty significant workload increase this year. We do expect the efficiency to go down and some regression in that category, but overall, we should see another electric year from Tony Pollard.
Yeah, Fitz, it feels like there's a lot of hype for Pollard. Obviously, our coworker Debro has Pollard as his RB1 in drafts this year. Obviously, we've talked about Saquon. The other 3 guys in this tier, Henry, Jacobs, and Taylor, it feels like the general consensus, and maybe I'm misreading the room and social media, feels like everybody's kind of down on all 3 of those guys, at least relative to what they've done in their careers. Are you kind of in line with that, Fitz, on those 3 again, Henry, Jacobs, and Taylor? Or are you maybe more optimistic on any of those guys, than kind of the general industry consensus is?
I understand the trepidation with Barkley and with Taylor and with Jacobs, given their situations and the contractual acrimony they've been through so far. And I kind of hate that Jacobs, and the reason I don't have Jacobs in this tier, I have him a tier lower, is because he had nearly 400 touches last season, and now he hasn't had a training camp to get back into hitting shape, I guess you could say. So I'm a little worried about maybe the injury risk. I would have loved to seen him in camp. I'm also a little worried about the possibility of a mutiny under Josh McDaniels this year. I just don't like the overall outlook for the Raiders. I'm in on Taylor, though. I realize the risk. I realize there's a chance he doesn't play week 1. I realize there's a chance he gets the blue flu and decides he has some sort of injury after he gets his 6 games in to make him eligible for free agency next year. But as far as best pure runners in the game, Taylor's right up there with Nick Chubb. He's a fantastic player. So, and boy, now you're going to tell me he could possibly go to Miami or Buffalo or Kansas City or someone else who might need a featured running back. I also wouldn't mind him sticking with Indy and running the RPO stuff with Anthony Richardson, which could be a lot of fun too.
What a shocker that Fitz is in on Jonathan Taylor. I hope everybody was sitting down for that one. Let's move to tier number 3 here. Getting a bit more question marks here as we move down the tiers. This is running backs 10 through 15. It's Joe Mixon, Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris, Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne, and Aaron Jones. Again, that's Joe Mixon at 10, Ramondre Stevenson at 11, Najee Harris at 12, Jahmyr Gibbs at 13, Travis Etienne at 14, and Aaron Jones at 15. Billy, are any of these guys in the wrong tier, either too high or too low?
No, I have all these guys in this tier. They're just kind of interchangeable depending upon how you have these offenses projected and the outlook for the rushing share or the target share. So I think this is the correct tier. I do think that this is probably the tier that we should probably talk about Josh Jacobs instead of the previous tier. I'm in agreement with Pat on everything he said there. But I think this tier is probably priced appropriately. And at the top of this tier for me, I have Jahmyr Gibbs.
Gibbs, okay, so another rookie that we're really high on. Is that an opportunity thing, or you just think the talent is too good? I mean, he was drafted so early that you would expect the volume will certainly be there, right?
Yeah, it starts with the draft capital that's involved. History would suggest that we're going to see a pretty decent return on him from a fantasy perspective. The other part is just opportunity in the passing game. We know that they are lacking weapons in the receiving core. Jameson Williams suspended for the first 6 weeks. We can expect to see Jahmyr Gibbs heavily involved in the passing game, and we're going to see him a lot between the 20s. This offense has one of the best offensive lines in football, going to be able to support 2 top 24 backs, in my opinion. So very high just in general on both these backs here in Detroit.
Fitz, who's your top guy in this tier?
Oh, it's it's Jacobs, since I actually have him here. But the guy I think some people are overlooking this year is Najee Harris. And yes, he had sort of a lackluster, disappointing season last year, but he was dealing with a Lisfranc injury early on. And we saw his productivity go up later in the season after the Steelers bye week. The Steelers have diligently upgraded their offensive line in the offseason, like big area of focus for them. And I think this will be the best offensive line Najee has ever run behind. So I know people look at that and see that he's averaged under 4 yards per carry each of his first 2 years. But, he was highly drafted. He's versatile as a run catch guy, and he's durable. He hasn't missed a game in 2 years, even though he had that Lisfranc injury last year. So I'm kind of fading the idea that Jalen Warren is going to take a major chunk out of Najee's workload.
Yeah, I agree with Pat here on Najee. I absolutely think that he's going to have a bounce back year. They spent a round 1 pick on Broderick Jones to upgrade that offensive line. They selected a blocking tight end in round 3. They came back around in round 7 and got another offensive lineman. We can probably see a much improved Steelers offense in general, not just an outlier with Najee.
So we all agree that nobody in here should be up in tier 2. Should anybody here be down in tier 4, Fitz?
No. I think this is right for all of these guys, and I've got a couple more in this tier, but maybe splitting hairs, and depending on how you split the tiers.
And Billy, is this tier 3 kind of where we get into that infamous RB dead zone range, or are these guys that you're still happy to take if they're sitting there in round 3, round 4?
I'm happy to take these guys, and some of these guys are even starting to slide into round 5 at times, and especially over at the FFPC. So I absolutely love where you can get running backs this year, because everybody has pushed up quarterback based upon last year's results, and subsequently what goes up must come down. So we're seeing a lot of these running back values fall, and absolutely love being able to wait on running back and get a handful of these guys in the 4 or 5 rounds.
I want to specifically ask you, Fitz, too, before we move off this tier, about these last 2 guys, Etienne and Aaron Jones. They both have younger backs that they share the backfield with. Obviously, Jones is a lot further into his career than Etienne. I feel like every year I sit there and I go, well, I don't know if I really buy that Aaron Jones is going to do this again. I don't really know why I feel that way. I just feel it every year. And then he always proves me wrong. And then Etienne this year, it's the question of Tank Bigsby. How much run is he going to get in that backfield? Does Doug Peterson even want Etienne to be like a heavy workload guy, as RB1 in the backfield? So Fitz, for either of these 2 guys, are those concerns worthy enough for you to maybe shy away from them, or you're not really concerned about either of that?
Not too concerned for Jones. He's just better than Dillon. And they do like to ratchet up Dillon's workload a little bit. It seems like in December, when the weather starts to get bad and they need that between the tackles grinder to pound away a little bit more. I do have some of those concerns about Etienne, though. The fact that they seem to want to play Jermichael Hasty on passing downs. The fact that they seem to want to play Tank Bigsby in short yardage situations, although, we don't know that definitively, but it's kind of pointing that way. I just wonder how many high value touches we're going to see ETN getting, the targets, the goal line work. I mean, that's the good stuff. So if he's just a between the 20s back, he might roll up 1,300, 1,400 yards of combined yards from scrimmage, but if he's not scoring touchdowns or catching passes, he's not going to wind up in RB1 range, most likely.
He is Pat Fitzmaurice. Make sure you are following him at bettingpros.com/fits to follow along with all of his picks all NFL season long. Make sure you download the Betting Pros app. And again, that's bettingpros.com/fits. Take advantage of all the research and effort he's putting into this and go make some money. I know I will be doing it this year. So I thank you in advance for helping to line my wallet here, Fitz. If you want a chance to win a glorious 36-inch fantasy championship trophy for your league, courtesy of our good friends at Trophy Smack, the #1 destination for epic fantasy tournament trophies, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below on this video, and that's it. We will be announcing a winner today. So stick around for all of Fantasy Fest and make sure to turn on those notifications so you can claim your prize. Let's move on to tier number 4. It's a bigger one than pretty much the rest of the way through. Every tier is a lot more sizable. Here we go from RB16 to RB24. And I'll just quickly run through Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Miles Sanders, Alexander Mattison, Dameon Pierce, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, James Conner, and Rashaad White. Again, quickly, that's Hall, Walker, Sanders, Mattison, Pierce, Dobbins, Akers, Conner, and White. So it's a lot of names there. Billy, do any of those stick out to you as too low or too high?
No, I think this is another tier that's probably priced appropriately. The only name that's missing from this tier that I have mixed in the middle of all those guys is going to be David Montgomery. But of that tier, I like Kenneth Walker the best. Rashaad White probably next in line there with the amount of targets he's going to see. But I think this is appropriately a priced tier. And I really like the outlook. A few guys that the reason why I'm higher on, of course, White I talked about was the targets. Last year we saw him as the RB12 in total targets, 58 as a rookie. We do know that Tom Brady is gone, and we're not going to see 700 passing attempts this season, but it's a pretty consolidated target tree between White, K-Dot, and Evans and Godwin. And so I think that we can see another high target share opportunity for Rashaad White here in 2023.
Yeah, Pat, Rashaad White is something that I just haven't been able to quite get there with, but I've done so many shows at this point this summer with analysts who are like, no, you're wrong. You should be excited about White this year, that I should probably just change my opinion at this point. What do you make of White, Fitz?
Well, we've still got Kareem Hunt and Leonard Fournette lurking as possible free agents who could dampen our enthusiasm a little bit, but I'm pretty enthusiastic about White. I mean, he sort of proved himself as a pass catcher last year. Just like, I think he can be a 3-down back. He has a 3-down skill set, and the Buccaneers don't seem to, like a lot of other NFL teams, don't seem to want to make a big investment at the running back position. So he's got a clear runway right now. That's the exciting part of it. He's going to get a big workload as things now stand.
If we're sitting here in October and Breece Hall has shaken off the rust and looks injury free, what tier will he be in on a weekly basis, Billy? Because it won't be tier 4.
Yeah, Breece Hall is one of the most trickier players to project because he has the skill set of tier 1, quite frankly. And if he didn't have the ACL injury, 1, I don't think they signed Cook. 2, we're probably talking about him inside of the top of this tier 1. That's how good Breece Hall is. The downside is, of course, we know he did have the ACL injury and they brought in competition for touches. That being said, he's still very dynamic. And he is, exceptional with the ball in his hands. I think that it would be a fool's errand to not consider him second half of the season as, tier 1, tier 2. He's the player that I don't want to beat me, right? And like when we look at drafts and we're drafting players, I will pass up players, and my logic is I'm going to make this player beat me. And there's few players that I say that about every year. Breece Hall is not one of those players, just because I am scared about what he could do when healthy down the stretch. And if I don't take enough of him inside of my roster construction and building out a portfolio of enough shares of Breece Hall, I would be scared inside the shootout not having him inside that portfolio.
Fitz, another running back in this tier that's similar. He didn't have the injury last year, but J.K. Dobbins has never quite gotten back to that full health. Again, in last week's episode, we did talk about how he's a player to avoid for Billy. What do you make of Dobbins, Fitz? Because I am a Ravens fan, but even aside from that, I've just been super excited, from a non-homer perspective about the addition of Todd Monken and the fact that Lamar is back and the fact that I think this is the best offensive line we've seen of the Lamar era since that 2019 special season, that Dobbins is the unquestioned RB1. There's a lot of stuff to like here, but he did look awkward running the ball. I mean, you saw kind of that straight leg, even on some of his breakaways, despite the fact that the numbers were pretty good to end last season. So taking all that into consideration, Fitz, what do you think about Dobbins, where he's priced right now at RB21?
I do not have him in this tier. I've got him a tier below. And yes, like the direction of the offense is exciting, but I'm just not getting good vibes on Dobbins. There was the appearance on the PUP list. There was his weird sort of quasi holdout this year, even though he really hasn't put together one great season yet and wants more money. And there's just, he doesn't catch passes. Like we could see Gus Edwards again, like taking over in large. I don't know if Melvin Gordon is completely shot yet. Keaton Mitchell has looked pretty good. So like maybe he doesn't really have this backfield to himself. I'm concerned about him. Like I'm really not getting him in any of my drafts.
I don't want to move on from the tier without diving a little more into some of these other guys. I know Billy said that Walker is his favorite. We talked about Hall. There's guys like Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison, Dameon Pierce, Cam Akers. It feels to me like these guys are going to determine a lot of fantasy leagues. You're going to be taking them early enough that they need to be contributors on your team. And we're not 100% sure that they will be. So of those guys, Sanders, Madison, Pierce, and Akers, we'll say of those four, which of those guys do you think is the best chance of being, maybe we don't put the phrase league winner on it, but a guy that really has a positive impact on your league? And which of those guys are you least confident in and pretty much avoiding in most drafts, Billy?
Alexander Madison is the one that's been hardest for me to get the pulse of, because I could see a scenario where he might even be undervalued based upon his costs in drafts. Also based upon the competition for targets that he has behind him, right? He only has Ty Chandler, Dwayne McBride. He's got Kenny Nwangu. So there's not a lot of touch competition here. And we know that he's also a decent pass catcher as well. And we could see an uptick in targets for him as a lead back with Dalvin Cook no longer in town. That being said, this could be a scenario where it's just kind of fool's gold. And now they mix in a hot hand approach, and maybe we do see some more Ty Chandler. Maybe we do see some Dwayne McBride towards the tail end of the season as they want to get the rookie some looks. And so this is one of the players that I find myself constantly adjusting inside of my rankings and projections based upon news and what we see inside of camp from beat writers or maybe even preseason snaps. And so it's one of the things that I think is either going to win leagues or lose leagues based upon the selection of Alexander Madison.
Putting you on the spot here, Fitz, rank those four guys: Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison, Dameon Pierce, and Cam Akers.
Akers, Pierce, White, Madison. And I have the same concerns about Madison. It feels like Madison could be the 2023 version of 2021 Mike Davis, where he's this career backup why are we drafting this guy in the 5th round? Oh, because he's the lead running back. Well, maybe he is. I mean, maybe we see Wongwu like come off the pup and like start doing great and like carving into that. Ty Chandler. There are other alternatives here. And I know with Mike Davis, he was a career backup because he was backup caliber. And Madison, it's different. He's been stuck behind Dalvin Cook, and he wasn't going to beat Cook on the merits. So, I might be selling him short. It's entirely possible. And I love Akers from this group. I mean, like we saw what he did. He was the running back 4, I think, over like his last 6 games of the season. And just once he sort of ended that weird estrangement from the team, obviously things went really poorly for him and his investors in the first part of the season. But man, towards the end, it was everything we were or everything I was expecting last year in the preseason. So he's kind of a big role, doesn't have a lot of competition for the Rams. I'm pretty enthusiastic about him. I think he should be a tier higher.
I will not blame anybody who's just feels burned by the first half of last year and doesn't want to go back to the Cam Akers well. But you're right. The signs for, all the upside is there. Let's wrap up with tier 5 here. I'll run through these names. Again, it's a lot of them, so I'll run through them quickly. James Cook, David Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, Javonte Williams, Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift, Dalvin Cook, Khalil Herbert, Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, A.J. Dillon, and Samaje Perine. That's Cook, Montgomery, Kamara, Williams, Pacheco, Swift, Cook, Herbert, Gibson, Robinson, Dillon, and Perine. So, Billy, it's obviously a lot of names here. Do any of them stand out to you, again, as kind of being in the wrong tier in either direction?
Yeah, Montgomery was one I mentioned probably 2 tiers ago that I think could be mentioned in, so I don't need to repeat that. But just as a refresher, one of the best O-lines in football, and they're down weapons, and I could see them utilizing both these running backs pretty heavily. James Cook is probably atop this tier outside of Montgomery for me, just because we love the offense. We know how elite they can be. They're lacking a true number 2 receiver. Gabe Davis, I know, had an injury last year, but still has been a letdown to his career up to this point. And James Cook just doesn't have the touch competition that he's had in the past, where Devin Singletary is no longer on the team. Damian Harris is still battling an injury. They've signed a couple other running backs, but not really worth mentioning. So Cook could see a pretty big uptick in opportunities, both in the passing game as well in the rush share department. And so really like the outlook on Cook this season and what he's going to be able to do in 2023.
Fitz, what's your big takeaway and strategy in this tier?
Yeah, Billy and I disagree on Saquon, but we agree with who should be atop this tier with Montgomery and Cook. The guys I can't really get on board with, Dalvin Cook. I feel like if Breece Hall comes back all the way, he can just sort of relegate Dalvin Cook to the dustbin with the Jets. I just think a healthy Breece Hall is going to blow Dalvin's doors off at this point. So I think you mentioned Dillon. I don't quite see him in this tier. I just don't think he offers enough as a pass catcher to do that. And, I think I'm okay with everyone else. The guy who's going to be interesting for me is Antonio Gibson with his role. Now that he's going to be the pass catching back for Washington, that could be a lot of fun. Let's not forget this guy scored double-digit touchdowns in his first 2 years in the league. He's a converted college wide receiver, and he is 228 pounds and has sub 4.4 speed. If Eric Bieniemy can do a better job of utilizing him than Scott Turner did, he could be a real surprise and a great value at fantasy drafts.
Billy, we're almost out of time here, but before we go, I want to get just sort of your philosophical opinion on the running back position in general. Is there one of these tiers that you think you're going to be targeting guys out of a lot just based on where they're falling in drafts, or you happen to really like the names there? Are there tiers you're avoiding? You're just not taking a lot of tier 1 guys. You're not taking a lot of tier 3 guys. How are you sort of approaching the position as a whole and looking at it from the perspective of these tiers?
Yeah, I'm a volume drafter, so I have various approaches to drafts depending upon how I want to increase or decrease my exposures. That being said, I track this pretty religiously. I have found myself really attacking the elite wide receivers early in drafts, especially at FFPC in these tournaments. So I find myself not taking a lot of tier 1 and 2. I will get them in the mix, especially if I'm looking at certain week 17 correlations or playoff correlations and shootout schedules. When I talk about the shootout schedule, it's weeks 15, 16, and 17, where all the money counts inside of these tournaments. On the flip side, I do find myself attacking the Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, Rashaad White, the James Cook, Cam Akers tier, all in that area, because we're able to get these guys anywhere from rounds 5 through 8 at times. And at that point, you can lock in 3 to 4 solid wide receivers, maybe get an elite tight end, maybe get an elite quarterback, depending upon your roster construction. And then these are the kind of backs that all have the upside to finish a tier above, or even 2 tiers above where they're being drafted at, based upon their opportunity share, their involvement in the passing game, their involvement in the goal line situations. And so I really like this tier because they have the widest range of outcomes that could catapult your team into a championship position and win a lot of money.
Fitz, we're out of time. Give me your favorite tier to draft from quickly.
3 or 4. The running back dead zone is livelier than usual, Ryan. It's like the dancing skeletons for the Grateful Dead.
And we'll wrap up with that. Thank you, Billy, for coming on to Fantasy Fest 2023. Fitz and I will be around later on for the rest of the show. Coming up next is Joe and Sam Hoppin and Alfredo Brown joining us as the guests for wide receiver rankings and tiers. So be sure to stick around for that and the rest of the show. For Billy and Fitz, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you again later.